Early access on Steam has been an interesting topic of discussion, especially with survival games. There's some real gems that come out, with things like The Forest and Subnautica being absolutely amazing. Then there are a few mediocre things that go through both good and bad phases. I think a good example of this would be something like DayZ or maybe Ark. You know, it gets going good, and then it kind of drops off a little, and then it gets going good again, and stuff like that. But the real beauty with early access games are when you have the ones that look like this. There aren't really a ton of these types of games, but the ones that do exist are pretty drastic and unforgettable. This type of trash game was pioneered by a lovely company known as CodeHatch. They're the so-called founders of scammy, disappointing, and outright terrible games. This is a reputation that has followed them for quite a while, and it all began with a title known as StarForge. StarForge is straight trash. Period. Originally announced as a crowdfunding project over on Indiegogo, the initial campaign raised over $135,000 and looked pretty promising. The game was another one that was compared to Minecraft, and this time it was combined with Halo with some tower defense type aspects thrown in as well. There was sandbox-like base building, some gunplay, and unlimited potential for an outstanding and popular game. People were really hyped and excited to see what all new things would come along in this exciting new title. But initial looks could be deceiving, and that was definitely the case with this game. Instead of dynamic physics, crazy custom voxel-based building creations, and uniquely generated weapons, players received what looked like a Unity creation made by a 12-year-old in 3 days. It was a complete disaster, and things would go downhill even further as it progressed, eventually leading to backers calling the game a scam and completely boycotting CodeHatch. But this is just the gist of the story. What exactly caused a game that raised over 180% of its financial goal to completely flop? Why did CodeHatch fail to deliver what they promised to thousands of people? And what will happen in the future with CodeHatch and their terrible reputation? We're going to answer all of these questions and more in today's video, Why StarForge Failed. The only fail that's bigger than StarForge is when you lose your wallet. I'm honestly a bit notorious for losing my wallet, which is why I was using the cheap stick-on phone wallets for a couple of years. But times have changed, and it's time to upgrade your wallet and keep from losing it. Hence why I now use one from Ekster Wallets, the sponsor of today's video. My wallet from Ekster is honestly one of my favorite wallets I've ever owned. It's really nice and well made. I mean, dude, look at this. It pops open where you can access all of your cards. But what's even better than the cool card opening mechanism is the fact that I can't lose it. If you lose your wallet, you can pull up the app and find it within seconds. So if you're interested in checking out Ekster Wallets, click the link in the description and use code robokast15 to get 15% off. Trust me, it is definitely worth it. My history with research on CodeHatch as a company goes all the way back to April of 2018. This is when I made one of the first videos talking about dead and failed games on my channel, where I discussed why Reign of Kings failed. But as a naive idiot, I was pretty optimistic. Oh wow, what a great game with so much potential! Look how good it could be! Yeah, that was never going to happen, and I was a bit biased because I actually played Reign of Kings and enjoyed it quite a bit. So it's time to be a bit more critical and look at CodeHatch from a more realistic perspective. So who is CodeHatch? Well, it's a small game development studio founded by two people, Will Swarren and Steve Smalley. Who are these people? Well, let's start with Will. According to the official CodeHatch website, Will is a lovely lad who began learning how to program at age 10. And he's been working hard on it every day since. How inspiring. Can Steve hold up to this crazy level of dedication? Well, turns out Steve also started learning how to program games at the age of 10, and he's also been working on it every day since. Copy and pasted sentences on the brief website description of the developers? Yeah, that sounds like CodeHatch. Based on the fact that Will's first title was released in around 2011, and they started at the age of 10, I'm assuming that each of these guys are in their late 20s. Theoretically, let's say they're each like 25. So, theoretically, since each of these guys have been coding every single day since they were 10 years old, that means they have 131,400 hours of experience. It apparently only takes 10,000 hours to master something. So, combined, these guys have mastered the art of game development 26 times. They're literally the Yoda of game development, and we can expect some top quality titles.
I'm gonna need it to get out of this slimy mud hole.
Mud hole? Slimy? My home this is!
R2, let him have it.
Okay, maybe they're more of the Baby Yoda style of mastery. But combined, these two guys founded CodeHatch in 2012, and their first project together was a title known as StarForge. StarForge burst into the limelight in early to mid 2012 with a post on r/gaming. People became interested in this new game pretty quickly, and the interest would increase even further with its Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign. This campaign presented the original image of what the developers wanted StarForge to become. It was a crafting and building game set on a procedurally generated alien planet in space. It had the survival and building aspects of Minecraft combined with the gunplay and feeling of Halo. It had mad potential. Look at what the developers mentioned would be in the game. First of all, we have procedurally generated weapons. There was also supposed to be infinitely generated voxel terrain where you can dig an endless tunnel, fly out to the far reaches of space, and explore a bunch of different biomes. Another big selling point was the idea of having fully dynamic physics with movement centered around biped locomotion, meaning moving with 2 feet. If this is what they were talking about, then it would be pretty cool in a video game. I'm not too sure what this meant, but like I said, it sounds cool. Finally, creatures were going to behave in a realistic manner, there were resources in a full economy, vehicles, turrets, furniture, and full character customization. At the launch of the campaign, the developers set a fixed goal of $75,000, meaning they said they only needed $75,000 to create the game they promised. So when they ended up receiving over 180% of what they originally said they needed, it was expected that this game was going to be outstanding, even better than promised. But as we all know by now, that wasn't the case. The rewards for donors on the campaign varied quite drastically, and some of them were a bit sketch. You could pay $15 to get access to the game, and it went all the way up to $350 to get a few copies of the game plus some reasonable rewards. But after this is when the weird rewards began to come into play. If you pay $1,000, you got the special in-game stuff plus your name in a prominent position in the credits. $10,000 allows you to become a developer for CodeHatch. Just pay money and now you can spend your time slaving over code and working on the game that you paid money to work on. That doesn't make much sense, but we're not going to question it. There were actually 4 people who paid for the $1,000 perk, and I assumed that these people would end up being the ones who were the most disappointed at the end. But this campaign is what went on to attract attention and make StarForge a popular topic of discussion online. PC Gamer left some positive comments on what the game was promising. Kotaku had some things to say, and even Notch was giving praise to what this game was supposed to be. All of this attention would lead to them ending their campaign in November of 2012 with over $135,000 raised. Sounds like it was on track to really go somewhere. Throughout this time, there were a few very early access alpha versions that were released to players. And while these versions of the game weren't the prettiest to look at, it was undeniable that StarForge had a ton of potential. Players completely overlooked the bad graphics and glitchy physics because of what they knew this game could become. The building and terrain editing systems were outstanding, and you had endless possibilities of what you could create. But keep in mind, this was extremely early in the development process, and there was no telling what would happen in the future. Later that year, the very things that sold players on the game would be removed: freeform voxel digging and infinite procedurally generated terrain. Both of these were a complete mess when they were previously in the game, and CodeHatch stated that they removed them in order to work on improving their performance. In November of 2012, there was a list released of things that CodeHatch was working on. The list included multiplayer inventory work, a new infinite terrain engine, and a few other very large things. After this update, there was a singular post on their Indiegogo campaign talking about their plans for the next big alpha update. The developers stated that, 1 month later, in January, there would be a major update to the game. This update would contain multiplayer, procedural weapons, a physics movement overhaul, optimization, fort defense, resources, better AI, and so much more. They were promising quite a bit. And January rolled around, but the update was delayed. Then it became February, and the developers announced their focus on creating a new fort defense game mode. And then it was March. At this point, on March 20th, 2013, StarForge launched on Steam in early access with no warning or explanation whatsoever. And none of these new things were even implemented. On one hand, they had all these promises, on the other hand, they had a new game mode, and then on the third hand, because they have 3 hands, they had the early access launch. Because of this, and after hearing this news without any previous knowledge that it would happen, players began to get irritated with the lack of communication and organization with the developers. CodeHatch began to pick up on this irritation, and they would end up hiring someone known as Juno for PR and community management. But CodeHatch was a bit overwhelmed and ended up hiring even more people to help with various aspects of the development process. ending up with a fairly large team compared to the initial 2 developers that the project started with. Even with the increase in staff, however, not much changed. This new community manager had trouble getting information from CodeHatch about what was going on with development, so even after this, players still knew nothing. CodeHatch refused to cooperate, and eventually, according to a post on Reddit, this community manager would end up getting fired in exchange for an in-house one at the CodeHatch HQ in Canada. Things improved a little bit once this new person was hired, and community update announcements started to be posted for players to read. Alpha version 0.57 was released on May 9th, 2014, and it was honestly a pretty big update. But even though it looked as if a lot of stuff was being added, there was still a ton of issues with the core mechanics of the game, and the stuff that was being added didn't really do much. The game was lacking a set goal, and it felt as if it was having an identity crisis. Was the focus on adding new content for the survival mode, or was it the campaign, or was it the defense mode? Is this supposed to be a game about exploration and discovery, or a game about grinding to build a big base? Players weren't really sure, and since the game felt like it was being pulled in so many different directions, I don't think that even CodeHatch truly knew what was going on. Just 1 month later, on June 24th, 2014, another new update would be released. This one was known as version 0.75, and it was the official release of the StarForge beta. Yes, you heard that right. Just 1 month earlier, it was version 0.57 alpha, and it moved directly to 0.75 beta, in one update. This update did fix a lot of issues and bugs that were in the previous version, but it didn't make the game complete. There were still a ton of underlying issues and the same identity crisis that was mentioned earlier. So why would the developers pull an unfinished product out of alpha just to say they made progress? And the answer to that is money. It all stems down to money. At this point, CodeHatch had been working with the $135,000 that they raised from the Indiegogo campaign for over a year and a half. The 2 initial developers that I mentioned earlier had quit their day jobs to work on development full-time. They also hired a community manager and quite a few other developers, who all had experience with big game development companies like BioWare. Plus, they now had an office to house all of these people. And as long as they were taking to do things, that money was stretched pretty thin, so they were trying to get the game released as soon as possible. The financial situation became apparent when, in July of 2014, the new community manager, along with 7 of CodeHatch's most experienced employees, were fired. CodeHatch did this under the table without informing the community of the changes. An active member in the community would end up finding out what happened and would expose CodeHatch in a forum post that went viral on Steam. With the company already being bad at communication, the fact that they didn't tell players of this major news negatively affected the community in a way that couldn't be reversed. The players had lost their trust in CodeHatch. This worsened even more when all members who supported or were involved with the post that exposed the company were banned from the Steam forums, and they had their accounts completely deleted off the official StarForge forums. One of these users was the ex-community manager Juno, who just so happened to be the person who posted a majority of CodeHatch's news, update logs, and forum posts. Because of this, thousands of important posts were deleted, which has honestly made the research for this video a lot harder than it should be, so thanks CodeHatch. From here, the rushed nature of things worsened. New items were being added without proper optimization, making things extremely buggy. Mechanics that were promised from the start with the Indiegogo campaign were being completely ignored. And that unlimited voxel terrain, well, that proved to be a big issue. CodeHatch promised something very big, and it was something that they didn't know how to make work. They couldn't figure out how to optimize the terrain and make it to where it didn't absolutely murder the performance. So they kept it in, but it wreaked havoc on every other aspect of the game. They tried to take the focus off of it by adding new game modes and mechanics, but this just leads back to the identity crisis problem that the game had from the start. This situation could have been improved with more work, but before those improvements even passed through the minds of the company, they decided that they would rather dig their own gravestone and tarnish their reputation for the rest of their company's life. They decided on September 18th, 2014, to release the game as a finished product. Not a beta, not an early access, a finished product. I mean, look at this trailer. This is terrible. In the game's official trailer, you could see how bad the performance is. Plus, somehow it even looks worse than in the alpha. This was an absolutely terrible decision by CodeHatch, and trust me, they knew they messed up. At launch, the game had extremely negative reviews. Promised features were completely forgotten about, half the Indiegogo backers didn't even get their rewards, and the game was basically unplayable, and nothing changed. The game didn't get any better over time, and CodeHatch kept it up on Steam for years to come, trying to make any profit that they could. In 2015, they began an alpha release of their new game, Reign of Kings. They abandoned StarForge and left the players in the dust with an unfinished and broken product. They abandoned an alpha game to make a new alpha game. This infuriated players even more, and they began to demand that StarForge was removed from the Steam store. Around this time, the developers decided to give a big middle finger to their very same player base that helped to bring them into existence. After concerns related to Reign of Kings, Will Sworen, CEO of CodeHatch, said this about StarForge. "We do not believe that we can further optimize StarForge in a noticeable way due to the raw requirements of the voxel terrain system. We spent 2 years trying to optimize it to the best we could, including rewriting it a couple of times. However, eventually further optimization became like squeezing a drop of water out of a dried sponge. The servers were heavily hampered by the terrain's constant need to generate as well, and this is part of why they had trouble at times. We tried our best, and we've learned from our past mistakes. We will always love games and game development, and we'll do our best to keep working towards a goal of making a great game." Oh, it's okay. They may have scammed people out of a lot of money, not delivered on anything they promised, released an unfinished product, banned their most active community members, and left a straight up scam on the Steam store, but they tried their hardest. If they didn't try, then yeah, you have a reason to be mad, but they tried. And this is when people lost all hope and respect for CodeHatch. They would end up removing StarForge off Steam on January 27th, 2017, and continue their endeavor to create low-quality, trash early access games that they leave unfinished. CodeHatch, just some advice. Maybe think about starting a new company and leaving your old reputation in the past. You guys obviously know how to make games, and I really think you could make something good if you were to start fresh. And no, releasing Heat, which is inevitably going to end up the same way as all of your other games, doesn't count as starting fresh. Please, no more people need to be scammed. What was your experience with StarForge? Did you think it had potential, or did you see its downfall coming from a distance? Let me know in the comments. Anyways guys, that's going to be it for today's video, so I hope you all enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time, and peace.